Gloria Ramirez was on board the flight feeling more than just a little anxious about traveling alone with her baby. As the Boeing 787's engines droned steadily in the background, an unexpected and shocking moment shattered the fragile calm of the first-class cabin. Out of nowhere, a flight attendant by the name of Veronica Palmer, whose reputation for efficiency had always been unquestioned until now, raised her hand in a fit of inexplicable fury and struck Gloria. The resounding smack of skin against skin echoed through the cabin, louder than the hum of the aircraft itself, and sent shockwaves of disbelief among the 26 passengers who sat frozen in their seats. In that heart-stopping instant, Gloria instinctively clutched her 6-month-old daughter, Sophia, even tighter to her chest, as if the tiny bundle of hope could shield her from the storm that was just beginning to unfurl. The sudden, piercing wail of baby Sophia filled the silence, a sound so raw and startling that it seemed to vibrate with the tension that now gripped the cabin. Each cry of distress only fueled the simmering anger within the passengers, who now bore witness to a scene that was far more than a mere lapse in professional conduct. It was a public humiliation, a display of cruelty that hinted at deeper prejudices. Veronica's eyes, once warm and accommodating, had transformed into cold, unyielding mirrors of contempt. It was clear that her action was not just a momentary loss of control, but rather the tip of an iceberg of bias that had long festered beneath the surface. For years, Gloria had silently endured the snide glances and whispered remarks that hinted she did not quite belong among the first-class elite. A subtle, insidious form of racism that targeted her Latina features and unassuming attire. Today, that prejudice had erupted in a violent act that would forever alter the course of her journey. At that very moment, unaware of the brewing storm, James Caldwell, the CEO of Meridian Holdings Group and Gloria's husband, was absorbed in his work just 14 rows ahead in economy class. His eyes were fixed on his laptop as he pored over quarterly reports, deep in thought about the complications surrounding the Sanderson acquisition. To him, the flight was nothing more than a convenient pause between high-stakes corporate decisions, yet fate had other plans. The man who once tenderly kissed Gloria goodbye at the airport security checkpoint, balancing little Sophia on her hip and promising her an evening with his reassuring words, was about to become an unwitting bystander to a tragedy that would shake the very foundation of his professional empire and his personal life. Earlier that day, as the couple had shared a heartfelt moment amidst the rush of airport security, Gloria had reassured James that everything would be fine, despite the long hours ahead and the unexpected detours that life often threw at them. She had laughed softly at his jokes about flying in first class, while he labored in the back with the regular folks, and he had returned that laughter with a warm, affectionate wink. But now, as she sat in the luxurious confines of first class with an ever-growing sense of dread, Gloria could not shake the feeling that her life was rapidly spiraling out of control. The flight, which was meant to be a serene journey across the skies, had transformed into a crucible where long simmering resentments were about to collide. At the boarding gate, the unease had already begun to manifest. Gloria had been addressed by her maiden name by the gate agent, Diane, a slight that stung more deeply than she had expected. It was a small reminder that, despite all her achievements, she was still viewed through the lens of outdated prejudices. A reminder that she was not the woman she had fought so hard to become. As she navigated the narrow jetway, carrying both her baby and her carefully packed essentials, the undercurrent of discrimination was palpable. Every step felt like a struggle against invisible forces that sought to remind her of her otherness in a world that celebrated conformity. Once aboard, the first encounter with Veronica had given Gloria hope that the flight might still offer some comfort. A genuine smile from another attendant and a reassuring welcome. However, that hope was quickly dashed as Veronica's demeanor shifted the moment she noticed little Sophia. Her glance lingered a moment too long, an unspoken judgment passing between them. The situation escalated when Veronica, with an icy tone that brooked no argument, admonished Gloria for the noise of her baby. "Ma'am, you need to keep your child quiet. We have other passengers trying to enjoy their flight," she said with a severity that bordered on cruelty. In that moment, the tension between them became palpable, the air thick with a sense of impending retribution. Gloria's response was measured, her voice calm despite the burning embarrassment and humiliation that now painted her cheeks a deep shade of red. "I'm doing my best," she replied softly, trying to explain that her daughter was merely tired and overwhelmed by the journey. Yet, Veronica's eyes, narrowed in disdain, left no room for understanding or sympathy. The implication was clear. Gloria, in the eyes of the flight attendant, did not belong in the exclusive realm of first class, a judgment rooted not in any failing of character, but in the prejudiced assumptions about her heritage and appearance. As the flight continued, every small gesture and remark from Veronica seemed designed to chip away at Gloria's dignity. The flight attendant's tone grew increasingly hostile, each interaction a reminder of the simmering conflict that now defined the journey. Meanwhile, across the aisle, an older gentleman named Robert offered words of sympathy and gentle advice, reminiscing about the days when his own grandchildren filled the cabin with laughter and mischief. His kind words, however, were but a fragile salve on a wound that was rapidly deepening. With every passing minute, the gulf between Gloria and Veronica widened, a chasm fueled by disdain, racism, and a bitter personal vendetta that neither of them could ignore. Back in the cabin, James continued to work diligently, unaware of the storm that had taken root just a few rows away. He had always prided himself on his hands-on approach to management, his willingness to listen to the crew and address their concerns. Yet, as he glanced up from his laptop during the safety demonstration, he couldn't help but notice the troubled expressions that rippled across the faces of those around him. It was as if the calm facade of the flight had been irreparably shattered by the act of violence that had occurred earlier. The airline's legacy, the pride of Meridian Airlines, now hung in a precarious balance, a balance that might soon tip into chaos if the underlying issues of discrimination and cruelty were not addressed. Gloria, feeling both the sting of humiliation and the weight of an impending reckoning, tried to comfort her restless baby while steeling herself for what was to come. The subtle glances, the whispered comments, and the overt hostility from Veronica all coalesced into a narrative of suffering that had been building for years. A narrative where Gloria was forced to confront not only the cruelty of one individual, but the systemic injustice that had been woven into the fabric of the institution she once believed in. In that moment, as she gazed out the window at the vast, endless sky, she felt a quiet resolve forming deep within her. She knew that the insult she had suffered was not one that would be easily forgotten, and that a grand, resounding act of retribution was on the horizon, a retaliation so powerful that it would shake the very foundations of Meridian Airlines and the corporate world beyond. As the minutes ticked by, the flight took on an almost surreal quality. Every time Veronica's icy tone reached her ears, Gloria's heart pounded with a mix of fear, anger, and a strange, emerging determination. The seeds of revenge, long dormant beneath layers of hurt and injustice, began to sprout. She realized that her struggle was not just a personal one, it was a fight against an entire system that had deemed her unworthy of respect and dignity. The cruelty of Veronica, the unyielding bias, and the subtle yet constant reminders of her otherness had all coalesced into a single burning desire for justice, a desire that would soon lead her to a path of extraordinary retaliation. The flight, once a routine journey across the country, had transformed into a crucible of emotion and conflict. The tension in the air was almost palpable, a living, breathing entity that intertwined with every whispered word and every stolen glance. Gloria's mind raced with thoughts of retribution, of making those who had wronged her pay for their cruelty in a manner that would leave them astonished and, dare she think, even regretful. As she cradled Sophia in her arms, she vowed silently that no longer would she be the meek victim of a society that judged her by her skin and her name. Instead, she would rise. an avenging force with a determination as fierce as the thunder that occasionally rumbled outside the aircraft. In that moment, amid the chaos and the pain, Gloria Ramirez, no longer just a victim, but a woman on the brink of a powerful, transformative journey, began to plot her grand response, a response that promised to be as magnificent as it was just. A response that would ultimately leave everyone watching exclaiming in disbelief and awe. Gloria Ramirez tried to steady her nerves as she returned to her seat after a brief moment of respite, her precious daughter Sophia still fussing in her arms. She reassured her little one in a soft, soothing tone that carried the warmth of a mother's love. "It's okay, baby, Mama's here," she murmured, even though inside she felt the icy grip of humiliation tighten with every passing second. Earlier, when she had been forced to pace the cabin to calm Sophia, she had felt a fleeting moment of relief. But as soon as she resumed her gentle lap around the first-class cabin, she became painfully aware of Veronica Palmer's cold, disapproving stare. Determined not to let the flight attendant's judgment crush her spirit, Gloria kept on walking slowly, humming softly while cradling her drowsing baby. Just as she thought a semblance of calm had returned, a bout of turbulence rattled the aircraft, jolting the sleeping child awake and sending sharp cries through the cabin. The soothing hum of the plane's engines was abruptly overpowered by the shrill announcement over the PA system, urging passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. In the ensuing chaos, Gloria hurried back to her seat, with Sophia in tow, juggling her efforts to secure her own seatbelt while soothing the now increasingly agitated baby. Before she could settle down, Veronica reappeared, her arms crossed and her expression hard as stone. "Ma'am, you need to take your seat immediately and quiet your child," she said with an icy tone that left no room for argument. Gloria's voice trembled as she pleaded, "I'm trying," while finally clicking her seatbelt into place. Yet Veronica was relentless, remarking that Sophia was now disturbing the entire cabin. "Do you have something to pacify her?" she asked, her words dripping with insinuation, as if Gloria had failed to prepare adequately for her child's needs. Despite having packed every necessity in her diaper bag, Gloria felt a surge of anger and sorrow mix with the embarrassment that now colored her cheeks. As the flight continued, Gloria's every effort to calm Sophia was met with Veronica's frequent disdainful glances. Gloria tried a pacifier, a small toy, and even gentle rocking and quiet singing, yet nothing could fully soothe her baby's distress. The weight of the situation bore down on her, and she sensed the eyes of the other passengers upon her, some filled with empathy and others with barely concealed irritation. Meanwhile, far away in economy class, her husband James Caldwell remained absorbed in his work, his noise-canceling headphones effectively shutting out the discontent that brewed in first class. James was oblivious to the escalating drama unfolding just a few rows away as he dove into the complex financial projections of his latest business venture. As minutes turned into a long, anxious wait, Gloria suddenly detected an unpleasant odor that signaled one more inevitable challenge. Sophia urgently needed a diaper change. Though the seatbelt sign was still illuminated due to the persistent light turbulence, Gloria knew that letting the discomfort continue would only worsen her baby's distress. Resolutely, she decided to risk a brief trip down the narrow aisle toward the lavatory. In that moment of quiet determination, she unclicked her seatbelt and prepared to leave, only to be intercepted once more by Veronica. The flight attendant's voice, cold and inflexible, cut through the cabin as she insisted, "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to return to your seat immediately." Gloria tried to explain that her daughter needed a diaper change urgently and promised she would be quick, but Veronica's face hardened as she reiterated that the lavatory was off-limits while the safety protocol was in effect, invoking FAA regulations as her shield. Gloria, caught between following the rules and tending to her daughter's needs, felt the sting of injustice deep within her soul. In the midst of this tense standoff, fate played a cruel trick. As Gloria turned to head back to her seat, Sophia's small, unexpected movement sent her reaching out and knocking over the cup of water that sat precariously on the tray table. The water splashed violently, soaking through Veronica's uniform skirt. Veronica gasped in shock as the cold liquid cascaded over her, her face contorting with anger and disbelief. "Look what you've done!" she exclaimed loudly, drawing the attention of several passengers. Gloria immediately apologized, her voice trembling with genuine regret as she insisted it was a complete accident. But Veronica, unable to hide her fury, began to dab at her soaked uniform with a napkin, her eyes blazing with indignation as she ordered Gloria to control her child. "This is completely unacceptable behavior," she snapped, her tone laden with accusations that cut deeper than any physical blow. Gloria's frustration, mixed with the pain of being judged so harshly because of her appearance and background, finally bubbled over. "She's a baby, not a programmable device," she retorted sharply, unable to hold back the surge of emotion that had been building up inside her for far too long. The verbal sparring quickly escalated into a more dangerous confrontation when Veronica continued her tirade, declaring that some people should not travel if they were unable to handle the responsibility of caring for a child. Gloria felt that accusation as a personal attack, one that not only questioned her abilities as a mother, but also smacked of the racial prejudices she had fought against for years. The air in the cabin grew heavy with tension as a small crowd of passengers began to watch the exchange, their eyes shifting between the two women. It was then that Robert, a kind older gentleman seated nearby, rose half to his feet and asked in a gentle yet concerned voice if everything was all right. His question did little to diffuse the situation as Veronica insisted that she was merely enforcing the rules, while Gloria's heart pounded with a mix of anger, hurt, and a profound sense of isolation. In a desperate bid to regain some semblance of calm, Gloria apologized once more for the mishap with Veronica's uniform and expressed her deep regret over the entire sequence of events. However, her words only seemed to infuriate Veronica further, whose voice rose in a crescendo of disdain as she accused Gloria of being inconsiderate and disruptive. Amid the escalating verbal battle, a younger flight attendant named Melissa, wide-eyed with shock and disbelief, arrived on the scene. Melissa's gentle, concerned tone urged Gloria to come with her to a quieter area, away from the prying eyes and growing hostility of the other passengers. With a heavy heart and a face still burning with humiliation from a sharply stinging slap delivered mere moments earlier by Veronica, Gloria allowed herself to be led back to her seat. The slap had struck her cheek with a force that made her stumble, and as she touched the reddened mark, she felt as if her dignity had been stripped away in front of everyone. Passengers murmured in shock as they witnessed the unfolding drama, their eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. Melissa knelt by Gloria's seat, offering a few ice cubes for her injured cheek and apologizing profusely on behalf of the airline for what had just transpired. Gloria, still in shock and cradling her baby tightly, managed to speak in a low, steady voice that belied the storm raging inside her. "I'm okay, just shocked," she replied, glancing down at Sophia, who was beginning to settle down, though clearly confused by the sudden commotion. With a voice full of quiet determination, Gloria mentioned that her husband, James Caldwell, was in economy, unaware of the catastrophe unfolding around her. Melissa, now fully committed to ensuring Gloria's well-being, promised to find James and inform him of the incident immediately, even as the weight of the confrontation pressed down on everyone in the cabin. Throughout the ordeal, the air had grown thick with a mix of fear, indignation, and the unmistakable scent of long-held injustice. Gloria could no longer ignore the reality that the cruelty inflicted by Veronica was not merely a lapse in customer service, but a reflection of deep-seated prejudices that had haunted her every step. As she sat back in her seat, still cradling her baby and staring blankly at the overhead compartment, a quiet resolve began to form in her heart. The shame and humiliation she had suffered were not the end of her story, but the catalyst for a dramatic transformation. A transformation that would see her rise above the injustice and exact a retribution so powerful that it would leave onlookers in awe. Even in the midst of chaos and pain, as the murmurs of discontent rippled through the cabin and the frightened cries of a child underscored the tragedy of the moment, Gloria Ramirez vowed that this would not be her last stand. She would not be defined by the cruelty of a single individual or the systemic racism that had long sought to undermine her dignity. With every tear that glistened in her eyes and every breath that steadied her resolve, she knew that the time for silent suffering was over. The injustice that had been inflicted on her would soon be met with a retribution so grand and resounding that it would shake the very foundations of Meridian Airlines and the corporate world it served. As the plane continued its journey, the events of the past minutes replayed in Gloria's mind like a bitter reminder of the obstacles she had been forced to endure. But with that painful recollection came also the promise of a new beginning. A promise that she would transform her suffering into strength, her humiliation into a rallying cry for justice. In that moment, as she watched Veronica retreat down the aisle with her head bowed in defeat and her fellow passengers exchanged uneasy glances, Gloria Ramirez silently vowed that her next move would be one that no one would ever forget. It was a move that would not only restore her dignity, but also challenge the deeply rooted prejudice that had cost her so much. And in that determination lay the spark of a revolution, one that would echo far beyond the confines of a single flight, leaving everyone who witnessed it saying in astonishment, "Wow, that's truly something." Gloria Ramirez had always prided herself on her resilience, but nothing could have prepared her for the ordeal of that fateful flight. As the Boeing 787 soared through the sky, the hum of its engines became a mere backdrop to a drama that would change everything for her. Earlier that day, when a surly flight attendant named Veronica Palmer had struck her in a moment of unbridled anger, Gloria had clutched her 6-month-old daughter, Sophia, tightly, as if her small body could somehow shield her from the assault. The slap had echoed through the cabin, a sound so jarring it silenced every passenger, and it was soon followed by Sophia's heart-wrenching cry. That moment of public humiliation, steeped in an undercurrent of racial prejudice, left Gloria feeling both exposed and deeply wounded. Passengers in first class exchanged looks of disbelief and sympathy, while Gloria, with her dark Latina features and modest attire, bore the brunt of Veronica's cruelty. A cruelty that had long been lurking behind judging eyes and snide remarks about her presence among the so-called elite. After that shocking moment, Gloria tried to regain some semblance of dignity by following advice from a kindly older gentleman named Robert, who had spoken with genuine concern as he offered her water and a soft blanket for little Sophia. Yet every step she took down the narrow aisle was met with Veronica's cold stare and condescending tone. Gloria had attempted to soothe Sophia by gently pacing the cabin, humming softly as her baby's eyelids drooped. But just as a brief calm had settled, turbulence shook the plane and startled Sophia awake, igniting fresh waves of cries. In the chaos that ensued, the flight attendant's harsh orders rang out as she demanded that Gloria return to her seat immediately, despite the obvious distress of her baby. With a trembling voice, Gloria complied, fastening her seatbelt as best she could, while desperately trying to calm Sophia, whose wails now pierced the already tense atmosphere. Veronica's presence was relentless. The moment Gloria fumbled with her seatbelt and reached for a pacifier from her diaper bag, Veronica's icy voice sliced through the commotion. She sneered and accused Gloria of being unprepared, of disturbing the peace of the flight with a crying infant. Gloria's heart sank with each barb, the weight of discrimination pressing down on her as she recalled the subtle, insidious comments that had greeted her at boarding, remarks about whether she belonged in first class simply because of the way she looked. The bitter sting of those words mingled with the physical pain of the earlier slap, leaving Gloria feeling utterly defeated. Yet even as Veronica's disdain grew more overt, Gloria tried every trick she knew, a pacifier, a toy, gentle bouncing, and soft lullabies, to comfort Sophia, though the persistent turbulence and Veronica's constant scrutinizing gaze made her efforts seem almost tragically futile. In the midst of this personal torment, fate dealt another cruel blow. As Gloria rose briefly to change Sophia's diaper, a necessary act to prevent further discomfort, Veronica intercepted her with a tone that brooked no argument. The strict FAA regulations were cited with a cold precision, leaving Gloria trapped between the need to follow safety protocols and the pressing needs of her distressed baby. In that tense moment, as Gloria navigated the narrow aisle and attempted to balance protocol with maternal duty, a clumsy accident occurred. Sophia's little hand knocked over a cup of water, sending it splashing all over Veronica's pristine uniform. The cold liquid soaked Veronica's skirt, and her reaction was swift and vicious. She gasped loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the cabin, and with fury burning in her eyes, launched into a tirade accusing Gloria of carelessness. Despite Gloria's immediate apology and pleas that it was an accident, Veronica's words were laced with accusations that hinted at a deeper bias, suggesting that Gloria's very presence in first class was a mistake, that a frazzled mother with a crying baby did not belong among those who paid a premium for silence and comfort. The verbal conflict escalated rapidly. Passengers began to murmur, their faces a mix of shock and pity, as Veronica's hostile words turned into a physical confrontation. In a moment that would be seared into Gloria's memory forever, Veronica's hand struck her sharply across the cheek, the force of the blow causing Gloria to stagger back, while Sophia cried out in horror. The sound of skin meeting skin reverberated, louder than the engines themselves, leaving the cabin in stunned silence for a heartbeat, before erupting into a chorus of gasps, exclamations, and urgent calls for the captain. It was a scene so raw and unfiltered that it brought to light the depths of cruelty and injustice that had been simmering beneath the surface all along. As the chaos unfolded, a younger flight attendant named Melissa hurried to intervene, her eyes wide with shock and concern as she knelt beside Gloria to offer a cold compress and comforting words. Meanwhile, Robert, ever the gentle soul, offered to get Gloria some water, his voice a soothing balm amid the turmoil. Across the aisle, in the quieter realm of economy class, Gloria's husband, James Caldwell, had been buried in spreadsheets and business reports, oblivious to the storm raging in first class. But when Melissa tapped him on the shoulder, urgency in her tone and a look of worry on her face, he removed his noise-canceling headphones and followed her, his tall, imposing figure moving purposefully toward first class. When James stepped into the cabin, his eyes fell upon Gloria, her face streaked with tears and bruised with a red mark, and his expression darkened with a mix of anger and protective fury. He crouched by her side, calling her Bella in a soft tone that belied the storm in his eyes, and gently asked for the full story. Gloria recounted every painful detail, the oppressive, biased remarks, the spilled water that ignited the confrontation, and finally the brutal slap that left her reeling. James listened in a silence that grew increasingly tense until his jaw tightened with barely contained wrath. His controlled demeanor concealed an inner storm of fury, not only at the physical assault, but at the blatant racial bias that had driven Veronica to treat his wife with such cruelty. With a steady, measured voice, James demanded to know where Veronica was now. Melissa, her professional composure barely intact, informed him that the captain had taken Veronica into the cockpit and that air marshals had been alerted, with law enforcement waiting to meet the plane on the ground. James's gaze hardened as he vowed that Veronica would answer for her actions. His authoritative tone brooked no argument as he requested an immediate meeting with the captain, asserting his rights as the CEO of Meridian Holdings Group, a title that now carried an even greater weight in the eyes of everyone present. In that moment, the cabin was charged not only with shock and indignation, but with the palpable promise of retribution that would leave onlookers in awe. As James sat beside Gloria, gently taking her free hand and offering reassurances that they would get through this together, the air of quiet resolve began to replace the earlier chaos. He tenderly inspected the red mark on her cheek, his voice soft but resolute as he reminded her that no one should have to endure such indignity, regardless of their background or circumstance. The conversation soon turned to the systemic issues at play, the deep-seated biases that allowed someone like Veronica to wield her power so recklessly, and the urgent need for change not just for Gloria, but for all those who had been made to feel unwelcome in spaces meant for luxury and comfort. As the remainder of the flight wore on, James and Gloria shared quiet moments, holding each other's hands and comforting little Sophia, who, exhausted by the day's events, finally drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. The other passengers, many of whom had witnessed the altercation, offered glances filled with support and sympathy, while a few whispered their admiration for the strength that Gloria displayed in the face of such overwhelming adversity. Robert, who had once offered her kind words from across the aisle, now spoke with quiet conviction about the need for accountability, his decades of experience in the airline industry lending weight to his assertion that those in power must use their influence to protect the vulnerable. Word of the incident had spread throughout the aircraft, and by the time the plane began its descent into New York, it was clear that the story would not be confined to the cabin. Gloria's face, marked by both physical pain and the emotional scars of a lifetime of discrimination, had become a symbol of the injustices that could no longer be ignored. The prospect of dealing with law enforcement, potential media attention, and a corporate fallout that threatened to expose the ugly underbelly of an airline once revered for its service filled Gloria with both dread and a fierce determination. James, ever the leader, reassured her that they would face whatever came next together, and that from this dark day, a force for change would emerge. As the plane taxied to the gate, the final moments of the flight were spent in a somber reflection of what had transpired. Melissa returned one last time with a message from the captain, who extended his sincere apologies and promised that a full investigation would be launched. In a hushed conversation, James affirmed that he would demand a complete explanation of how such a disgraceful act could occur on one of their flights. A promise that hinted at a future retribution so grand that it would shake the very foundations of Meridian Airlines and the corporate world beyond. Gloria, though still shaken, found solace in James's unwavering support and in the shared determination that their painful experience would not be in vain. When the aircraft finally landed and the passengers began to disembark, the storm of emotions that had brewed in the cabin gave way to a sense of resolve. Gloria Ramirez, no longer merely a victim of racial bias and unprovoked aggression, was now the beacon of a burgeoning revolution. A revolution that would demand accountability, foster change, and ensure that no other mother would ever have to endure such indignity. And as she walked off the plane, supported by her loving husband and with Sophia nestled safely in his arms, Gloria knew that her next move would be both bold and transformative. A move that would leave everyone watching saying in astonishment, "Now that is what I call a comeback." Gloria Ramirez never imagined that a simple transcontinental flight would turn into a battleground for her dignity, a stage where deep-seated prejudices and blatant discrimination would collide with her maternal love and unyielding strength. As her Boeing 787 touched down at JFK International Airport, the events that had unfolded in the cabin were still echoing in her mind. Earlier in the flight, a vicious confrontation had erupted in first class when a flight attendant named Veronica Palmer, fueled by an attitude that bordered on outright racism, had struck her in a moment of uncontrolled anger. Veronica's hand had lashed out, delivering a slap that reverberated louder than the aircraft's engines, leaving Gloria reeling in shock, while her precious 6-month-old daughter, Sophia, wailed in terror. The brutal act was not simply a matter of poor service. It was a manifestation of an ingrained bias that seemed to say, Gloria, with her modest attire and dark Latina features, did not belong in the upscale sanctuary of first class. In the aftermath, as the passengers watched in disbelief and whispered their condolences, Gloria clung tightly to Sophia, each cry of her baby intensifying the sense of humiliation and despair. Despite the comforting words of a kind older gentleman named Robert and the tender reassurance of her husband, James Caldwell, who had finally rushed to her side after being abruptly pulled from his work in economy class, the raw pain of the assault remained etched on her heart. James, tall at 6'2" with a commanding presence, had listened with quiet fury as Gloria recounted the series of events. The subtle sneers at boarding, the dismissive tone when she attempted to calm Sophia during turbulence, and finally the humiliating blow that shattered her composure. After the slap, as the first-class cabin was thrown into chaos, Veronica was quickly removed from duty and escorted to a separate area for questioning. Yet, even as the cabin crew and passengers scrambled to restore order, the damage had been done. Passengers offered sympathetic glances and whispered words of support, while the memory of Veronica's demeaning words, implying that a frazzled mother with a crying baby did not belong among those who paid for a premium experience, continued to haunt Gloria. When Veronica's outburst had escalated into a full-blown altercation, culminating in that unforgettable slap, it had been the breaking point for a woman who had long borne the burden of subtle prejudice and microaggressions. The tension in the cabin persisted as the flight finally landed. An airport police officer, Officer Rivera, soon boarded the plane and began taking statements. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of anger, sadness, and the bitter aftertaste of injustice. Officer Rivera addressed Gloria formally, referring to her as Mrs. Reyes Caldwell, and asked her to recount every detail of the incident. With a trembling voice but steely determination, Gloria described how Veronica had sneered at her, questioned whether she truly belonged in first class, and, after a series of escalating exchanges that left her desperate to calm Sophia, had struck her when a spilled cup of water had ignited the confrontation. Gloria explained that the harsh treatment and demeaning comments had not been isolated to that moment. They were the cumulative result of years of being made to feel inferior in a space meant for comfort and luxury. It was as if every small slight and every cold glance had been building toward this violent eruption. Officer Rivera listened intently, nodding as he made careful notes. He asked if she believed that racial bias had influenced Veronica's behavior. Gloria hesitated only briefly before admitting that while she could not read minds, the tone and choice of words left her with an unmistakable feeling of being judged, not for her behavior, but for her very appearance. While Gloria sat in the privacy of an executive lounge specially arranged for her by Meridian Airlines, Evelyn Winters, the VP of Customer Experience, expressed the airline's profound apologies for what had happened. Evelyn's tone was measured and contrite, as she promised that the matter would be thoroughly investigated and that steps would be taken to ensure such an incident never happened again. James, however, was already a picture of controlled rage. He had accompanied Gloria into the lounge, his presence both protective and determined. When Officer Rivera inquired whether Gloria wished to press charges for the assault, her response was tinged with sadness. She did not want to see anyone's life ruined, yet she insisted that accountability was necessary for the sake of all the passengers who might one day be subjected to similar indignities. James's stern expression and his measured tone reminded everyone present that this was not just a personal matter. The incident had far-reaching implications for the airline's reputation and the corporate culture that had allowed such behavior to fester. Even as Gloria recounted the series of events, the spilled water, the relentless verbal abuse, and finally the shocking physical assault, James's eyes burned with a mix of protective fury and the resolve to make sure that justice was not just a personal retribution, but a systemic change. He made it clear that while he understood Gloria's reluctance to press charges immediately, he would insist on a thorough investigation and a full explanation from the airline's highest echelons. In the private room of the executive lounge, where soft lighting and comfortable seating provided a stark contrast to the harsh fluorescent glare of the airplane cabin, Gloria allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She leaned back against the plush couch, her eyes closing briefly as the adrenaline of the ordeal began to ebb away, leaving behind a heavy fatigue and a burning need for justice. James sat beside her, gently taking her hand in his voice soft yet unwavering as he asked how she was truly feeling. "Tired, frustrated, and still in shock," she admitted quietly. Even as Officer Rivera stepped away to give them privacy, Evelyn Winters returned to offer further apologies and to ensure that all their needs were met: water, tea, and even a comfortable crib for little Sophia. The conversation in the lounge soon turned to what steps needed to be taken next. James's authoritative yet measured tone made it clear that he expected a full investigation and that he would not allow such blatant misconduct to go unpunished. He mentioned that the incident was not just an isolated case of one flight attendant's loss of control, but symptomatic of a larger, systemic issue within Meridian Airlines. A culture that had long tolerated a certain level of discrimination and indifference toward passengers who did not fit the stereotypical image of a first-class traveler. Gloria's weary but resolute voice agreed, insisting that while she did not want to see anyone's life destroyed, the person responsible for her humiliation needed to be held accountable. Amid the hushed murmurs of other lounge guests and the discreet concern of the airline's staff, the discussion grew increasingly focused on the necessity of change. James emphasized that his role as CEO of Meridian Holdings Group came with the responsibility of not only leading a successful enterprise, but also ensuring that the company's values of respect and fairness were upheld. He vowed that no other passenger would ever have to endure the kind of degradation that Gloria had suffered on that flight. His words resonated deeply with those present, especially with Gloria, whose own resolve was solidifying into a quiet determination to turn her personal trauma into a catalyst for broader reform. By the time the conversation in the lounge wound down, the once overwhelming chaos of the flight had been replaced by a sober determination to seek justice. As the group prepared for a formal meeting with the CEO of Meridian Airlines later that day, Gloria felt a strange mix of exhaustion and empowerment. The pain of the assault was still fresh, and the red mark on her cheek was a physical reminder of the cruelty she had endured. But within that pain lay a spark of revolution, a spark that promised that this incident would not be forgotten, and that the forces of injustice would be met with a response so resolute and magnificent that it would forever change the culture of air travel. Gloria realized that this was not merely about a single act of violence or a fleeting moment of disrespect. It was about challenging an entire system that had long taken for granted that some people were less worthy of dignity and respect than others. With every tear that had fallen and every word of support that had been spoken, she was building the foundation of a movement that would ensure that the values of fairness, accountability, and respect were not just buzzwords, but living principles upheld by every person and every institution. In that executive lounge, as the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of teacups provided a backdrop to their discussion, Gloria Ramirez made a silent vow to herself and to all who had witnessed her ordeal. She would not let this injustice define her. Instead, she would use it as a catalyst to inspire change, to demand better treatment for all passengers, and to hold accountable those who wielded their power with cruelty and prejudice. And as she sat there, her hand entwined with James's and the distant sounds of the terminal echoing around them, Gloria knew that the next steps in her journey would be bold, transformative, and utterly unforgettable. A comeback that would make every witness exclaim, "Now that is what I call a revolution." Gloria Ramirez sat in the quiet aftermath of that fateful flight, the echo of every harsh word and painful slap still ringing in her ears as she tried to piece together what had happened. In the calm that followed the storm, her husband James Caldwell's determined voice and warm smile offered her a moment of solace. He reminded her gently, "And this is why I married you. Your compassion and perspective amaze me, especially after what you just experienced." Gloria, still tender from the physical and emotional wounds, asked softly if that meant she agreed they shouldn't press charges. James carefully replied, "I think we have an opportunity here." an opportunity to address something bigger than one incident on one flight. Understanding why it happened is crucial, and I believe we can achieve that without involving the criminal justice system, if that's what you prefer. Gloria's eyes, tired yet resolute, met his as she considered his words. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noticing the determined glint in his eyes. James leaned in and said, "I'm thinking that tomorrow I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with Marcus Bennett about the culture of his airline. And I'm thinking that Ms. Palmer's future employment might depend less on criminal charges and more on her willingness to be part of the solution to a problem she's helped expose." Gloria hesitated for a moment as she weighed the prospect of using this painful incident as a catalyst for systemic change. "You want to use this as a catalyst for change," she said slowly. "With your permission, what if, instead of punishment alone, we focus on education, on creating systemic change within the airline's culture?" Ms. Palmer's actions were inexcusable, but perhaps they point to deeper issues that need addressing. James nodded, his voice steady as he explained, "This happened to you, not me. If you want to press charges, I'll support you completely, but if you're open to an alternative approach, I want to use this moment to force a company-wide initiative that addresses bias in customer service, with training programs, clear policies, and accountability measures that have real teeth, not just corporate window dressing." Gloria could feel her resolve hardening. "Restorative justice rather than purely punitive measures," she mused. "I like that approach," James replied, though he added that they still had time to think it through. "For now, let's focus on getting you and Sophia home and rested," he said, as a soft knock at the lounge door interrupted them. Evelyn Winters, the courteous VP of Customer Experience for Meridian Airlines, stepped in with a calm announcement. "Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Reyes Caldwell, our car service is ready whenever you'd like to depart. Your luggage has been retrieved from the aircraft and is already loaded. The driver will take you directly to your home or any other destination you prefer." James replied with gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. We appreciate the arrangement." Evelyn then added, almost hesitantly, "I've also been asked to inform you that Marcus Bennett would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at your convenience. He's cleared his entire schedule." Exchanging a meaningful glance, James and Gloria silently agreed that 10 o'clock at his office would be ideal, with a request for Bennett to bring his head of HR. And, before leaving, Gloria's voice grew quiet but firm as she addressed Evelyn. "I'd like Ms. Palmer to be there as well." Evelyn appeared truly startled at first, questioning, "Ms. Palmer, are you sure about that?" Gloria clarified, "Not as a condition of anything, but as an opportunity. Please extend the invitation and make it clear that it's her choice whether to attend." With that instruction, Evelyn nodded and left, leaving James to look at Gloria with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You want to face her again," he remarked softly. "If we're serious about this being about change rather than punishment, then yes," Gloria replied. "I want to hear what she has to say when she's not in the heat of the moment, and I want her to see me, really see me as a person, not just an inconvenience or a stereotype." James shook his head in wonder and said, "Have I told you lately that you're remarkable?" Gloria managed a genuine smile for the first time since the incident, replying, "Not since this morning, but I wouldn't mind hearing it again." Leaning in, James kissed her gently, assuring her that whatever happened tomorrow, they would face it together. As they prepared to leave the lounge, carefully gathering their belongings and gently cradling a still sleeping Sophia, Gloria found herself reflecting on what Robert had said earlier on the plane about positions of influence coming with responsibility. Perhaps this painful experience was an opportunity to use that influence for something truly meaningful, to transform an ugly incident into the catalyst for positive change that would ripple throughout the company and beyond. The following morning arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn in New York. Gloria stood before the mirror in their Upper East Side apartment, carefully applying concealer to the faint yellowish mark that remained on her cheek. Despite the exhaustion that had settled over her, James appeared behind her in his tailored suit, his expression more serious than usual as he said, "You don't have to come today if you're not feeling up to it. I can handle the meeting." Gloria turned and met his eyes, determined. "I know you could, but I want to be there. This started with me, and I should be part of where it goes next." Nodding, James consented while Sophia's nanny arrived early, having already settled the baby in the playroom. "Good," Gloria said with relief, returning to the mirror to apply a final touch of makeup as she rehearsed in her mind what she wanted to say. "I've been thinking about what I want to say today, not just to Veronica but to the executives as well," she confided to James, who raised an eyebrow in silent encouragement. "This isn't just about one flight attendant losing her temper," Gloria continued. "It's about why she felt comfortable directing that temper specifically at me, why the subtle hostility began the moment she saw me in first class with a baby." James observed approvingly, "You're going to address the underlying bias directly." Gloria nodded, her voice growing firmer. "Yes, someone needs to, and I'm in a unique position to do it. I experienced it firsthand, and I also happen to be married to the man who can actually mandate change throughout the company." James smiled with a powerful combination of authority and tenderness. "Just remember, this is about creating sustainable change, not just delivering consequences. We want them to be partners in the solution, not just accept a decree from above." Gloria agreed. "Trust me, I've thought this through." By 9:45 that morning, they had arrived at the Meridian Holdings Group headquarters in Midtown, a sleek, modern building that housed not only Meridian Airlines but several other transportation and logistics businesses under its wing. As they entered the executive floor, James's assistant Andrea greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Reyes Caldwell," she said professionally, though Gloria noticed a curious glance at her still fresh mark. It was clear that news of the incident had already circulated through corporate headquarters. Andrea informed them that everyone was assembled in the main conference room, including Ms. Palmer, who had arrived about 20 minutes earlier with her union representative. James nodded as Andrea explained, "Meridian's general counsel is present as you requested, along with Mr. Bennett, Ms. Chen from HR, and Mr. Donovan from Training and Development." "Perfect," James said, and they proceeded into the conference room where a palpable silence fell as soon as they entered. At the large oval table sat Marcus Bennett, the airline's CEO, a distinguished man in his late 50s, Helen Chen, the head of HR, Thomas Donovan, the VP of Training, and Richard Weber, the general counsel, impassively watching every move. At the far end of the table, Veronica Palmer, still in her Meridian uniform but lacking the customary wings pin, sat with her stern-faced union representative by her side. Her eyes widened when she saw Gloria, but then immediately dropped to the table in defeat. James greeted everyone with a neutral yet authoritative tone. "Good morning," Marcus Bennett began. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mrs. Reyes Caldwell. First, let me express my personal apologies for the inexcusable incident that occurred yesterday," James replied. "I'm glad to hear that, Marcus, but before we begin, I want to clarify the purpose of this meeting. We're not here to relitigate what happened. The facts are not in dispute. What we are here to discuss is why it happened, and what we're going to do to ensure it never happens again." The union representative, a stern woman with steel gray hair, leaned forward and said, "If I may, Mr. Caldwell, my client understands the severity of her actions and is prepared to accept appropriate disciplinary measures. However, I must emphasize that Ms. Palmer has a 15-year record of exemplary service, with only 2 minor incidents previously noted in her file." Gloria interjected quietly for the first time. "And what were those incidents?" The representative hesitated, then replied, "I don't believe those are relevant to the current situation." Gloria countered, "I believe they may be, especially if they involved interactions with passengers that suggested a pattern of behavior." As Helen Chen from HR began to speak, the room held its breath, and Gloria knew this was the moment to demand accountability, not just for herself, but for every passenger who had ever been made to feel inferior. In that tense conference room, as voices rose and fell and every word was weighed with the promise of sweeping change, Gloria Ramirez stood as a symbol of resilience against a system marred by bias and cruelty. Her measured, heartfelt questions and firm insistence on addressing the underlying issues of prejudice struck a chord with everyone present. With James's steadfast support and the looming possibility of a company-wide initiative to eradicate discriminatory practices, Gloria made it abundantly clear that this was about more than just one woman's pain. It was about transforming the very culture of Meridian Airlines so that no other passenger would ever be subjected to the indignities she had endured. And as the meeting progressed, with every nod and every thoughtful silence from the executives, it became evident that Gloria's call for change was not only necessary, but long overdue. Gloria Ramirez listened intently as the room grew silent and the details of Veronica Palmer's past emerged. One crew member recalled a scheduling dispute from 5 years ago, while another mentioned a customer complaint about rudeness 3 years back that had been investigated but ultimately left unresolved because the passenger declined further contact. When Gloria asked, with a steady voice tinged by pain, whether that complaint involved a passenger from a minority background, the heavy silence that followed spoke volumes. "I see," Gloria said softly, her eyes not leaving the faces gathered around the oval table. James Caldwell, her steadfast husband, nodded in agreement as he added, "Let's be direct here. My wife believes, and the evidence suggests, that racial bias played a role in how Ms. Palmer treated her from the moment she boarded with our daughter. That bias created a foundation of hostility that eventually escalated to physical assault." Marcus Bennett, the airline CEO, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Caldwell, we take allegations of discrimination extremely seriously," he began. "These are not just allegations," James interrupted firmly. "They are observations from the person who experienced them firsthand. And I'm not interested in corporate platitudes about taking things seriously. I'm interested in concrete actions." An uncomfortable hush settled over the room as all eyes turned to Veronica Palmer. Finally, with trembling determination, Veronica looked up and said, "May I speak?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, and every person in the room was focused on her. Though her union representative placed a cautionary hand on her arm, Veronica gently shook it off. "Please do," Gloria encouraged, her tone neutral yet unyielding. Veronica took a deep breath. "What I did was inexcusable. There is no justification for striking a passenger, especially one holding her child." She paused as tears threatened to spill, then continued, "I want to be clear. I did not target you because of your race." Gloria interrupted quietly, "Consciously?" The word hung in the air as Veronica flushed with uncertainty. "What I mean is that I do not consider myself prejudiced. I have never thought of myself that way. Few people do." Gloria's voice rose with controlled intensity as she replied, "Yet from the moment I boarded with my daughter, there was a different quality to your interactions with me compared to other passengers. You questioned my right to be in first class. You made assumptions about my ability to care for my child. You escalated minor issues into confrontations." Veronica attempted a feeble defense. "I was having a difficult day. The flight before had been challenging and I was tired." Gloria's eyes softened momentarily before her resolve returned. "We are all tired sometimes, but we do not all direct that fatigue into hostility towards specific types of people. What I experienced was not just an isolated loss of temper, Ms. Palmer. It was the culmination of a series of microaggressions that began the moment you saw me." Veronica fell silent, unable to meet Gloria's steady gaze. Thomas Donovan, the vice president of training, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ramirez, if I may, I believe you have identified a significant gap in our training programs. While we do include diversity and inclusion modules, they are relatively basic and do not address unconscious bias in depth. This incident clearly indicates that we need to reevaluate our approach." Gloria nodded, her voice resolute as she said, "I agree, but training alone is not sufficient. There needs to be accountability, clear policies, and a cultural shift." Helen Chen, the head of human resources, leaned forward with genuine interest and asked, "What specifically would you recommend?" Gloria exchanged a meaningful glance with James before responding, "First, I demand a comprehensive review of your customer service protocols, with an emphasis on identifying and eliminating bias triggers. Second, enhanced training for all customer-facing staff should be implemented. Not just a one-time seminar, but ongoing education with real-world scenarios and regular refreshers. Third, establish a robust reporting system for passengers who experience bias, with clear follow-up procedures." Marcus Bennett nodded, relief softening his expression. "Those are excellent suggestions, and we can certainly implement them." Gloria raised her hand politely to interject. "I am not finished. Fourth, there should be consequences for Ms. Palmer's actions, but those consequences must be constructive rather than merely punitive." All eyes turned back to Veronica, whose expression shifted to one of confusion mixed with shame and fear. The union representative asked cautiously, "What do you mean by constructive consequences?" Gloria explained firmly. "I mean that if Ms. Palmer is willing, she could play a role in developing and implementing the improved training programs. Your experience, both in your years of service and in this incident, could provide valuable insight into how unconscious prejudices develop and manifest. It is not solely about punishment, it is about making things right, so that future passengers never endure what I did." At that moment, James spoke up in a calm yet commanding tone. "My wife and I have decided not to press criminal charges, provided that Meridian Airlines commits to implementing the changes I have outlined. As for Ms. Palmer's continued employment, that is ultimately a company decision, but we believe that genuine remorse combined with a commitment to being part of the solution should be considered mitigating factors." Veronica's eyes widened in disbelief. "You are not pressing charges and you want me to help with training?" she asked in a tremulous voice. Gloria met her gaze steadily and replied, "Yes, but only if you are willing to acknowledge the role that bias played in your actions, not just the final incident, but the entire interaction from the beginning of the flight. I believe people can change and grow, Ms. Palmer, but only if they are honest with themselves about where they started." Tears welled in Veronica's eyes, and she stammered, I don't know what to say." Gloria reached out, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't need to say anything right now. This is a lot to process. But understand that what happened on that flight was not just about you and me. It is about a pattern that affects countless passengers every day, most of whom do not have the privilege or platform that I do to address it. That is why our response must be systemic, not just focused on one incident or one employee." Marcus Bennett looked thoughtful as he said, "Mrs. Ramirez, your perspective is incredibly valuable. I would like to propose that you consult with our team as we develop these new programs. Your first-hand experience, combined with your professional insight, would be an asset." Gloria replied, "I am willing to help. This is not about punishment or public relations. It is about creating meaningful change." James nodded in agreement and added, "I expect detailed proposals for training and policy changes within 2 weeks, and I want regular updates on the implementation." Turning his attention back to Veronica, Marcus Bennett said quietly, "Ms. Palmer, you have a decision to make about your role in this process. I suggest you take some time to consider it carefully." The meeting concluded with firm handshakes and assurances from the Meridian executives. As the room began to empty, Veronica approached Gloria hesitantly. "Mrs. Ramirez," she began in an unsteady voice, "I know an apology is not enough, but I am truly sorry, not just for striking you, but for everything that led up to it. I have never seen my behavior in this light before, and it is very uncomfortable to confront." Gloria regarded her thoughtfully and replied, "Uncomfortable is where growth begins, Ms. Palmer. What matters now is what you do with that discomfort. Think of it as an opportunity to change, not only for yourself, but for others who might be affected by similar biases. Veronica nodded slowly, a spark of determination mingling with her tears. "I want to be part of fixing this, if you'll allow it," she said softly. Gloria replied, "It is not about my permission, it is about your commitment to change for yourself and for those who suffer because of such biases. Consider it carefully and let Mr. Donovan know your decision." As James and Gloria left the conference room, he squeezed her hand gently and whispered, "You were magnificent in there. Firm but compassionate, a rare combination." Gloria smiled wearily, thinking of the lesson she hoped to one day share with their daughter Sophia, that when faced with injustice, they chose to create change rather than simply seek punishment. James added, "And speaking of Sophia, let's go home to her. I think we've done enough corporate transformation for one day." As they stepped into the elevator, Gloria reflected on the long and painful journey that had begun with a shocking act of violence and discrimination. Though the sting of the slap and the humiliating ordeal would always be a part of her past, it had also ignited a spark for revolution. A revolution that promised to transform not only Meridian Airlines, but the very fabric of customer service in the industry. In the weeks that followed, true to their word, the Meridian executives developed comprehensive proposals for enhanced training, revised policies, and new reporting systems. Gloria worked closely with them, lending her perspective as both a victim of bias and a determined advocate for change. To everyone's surprise, Veronica Palmer stepped forward to participate in the process. After a 30-day suspension and an intensive bias awareness program, she joined the team developing the new training materials, openly sharing how unconscious prejudices had colored her perceptions, and how that fateful incident forced her to confront parts of herself she had long ignored. 3 months later, Gloria found herself standing beside Veronica in a Meridian Airlines training facility, addressing a group of flight attendants about the new bias awareness program. As she looked out at the attentive faces, Gloria knew that something truly meaningful had emerged from that painful day, transforming a moment of injustice into a powerful movement for change that would benefit countless passengers for years to come. In life, we all face moments of deep injustice and overwhelming challenges that can leave us feeling small, powerless, and alone. Yet it is in these moments of darkness that we have the opportunity to discover our inner strength and rise above the pain. I want to share a perspective that has been close to my heart, and to invite you, our cherished reader, to join me in a conversation about transformation, hope, and the power of our voices. Every one of us has experienced times when we felt overlooked or disrespected because of our background, our age, or even our appearance. These experiences may come in many forms, from a harsh word to an act of physical aggression, and they can cut deeply into our sense of self-worth. But rather than allowing these painful incidents to define us, we can choose to let them become catalysts for positive change. I have seen firsthand how an act of unprovoked cruelty can spark a fire that transforms not only an individual's life, but also the culture of an entire community. Consider a woman who has spent years nurturing her family, working hard and overcoming obstacles that many of us cannot even imagine. One day, while traveling, she is subjected to a moment of humiliation and abuse. Instead of shrinking away in silence, she chooses to stand tall, to channel her pain into a determination to change the world around her. Her response is not one of vengeance, but of transformation. She calls for systemic change, urging those in power to address the biases and prejudices that have long been ignored. Her bravery in sharing her story and demanding accountability creates ripples that touch countless lives. This story is not just about a single event, but about the journey of growth that follows when we refuse to accept injustice. It reminds us that our experiences, no matter how painful, are not the end of our story. Instead, they are the beginning of a new chapter where our voices can lead to change. Every time we stand up and speak out against unfairness, We build a bridge for others who have been silenced. We show them that there is hope and that together we can rewrite the narrative. It is a reminder that change begins with us, that even the smallest voice can be a spark that ignites a movement. I believe that we all have the capacity to turn our personal struggles into a source of inspiration and strength for others. When you face a moment of disrespect or when you witness an act of cruelty, it is natural to feel anger and hurt. Yet, if you can transform that pain into a lesson, you can pave the way for a future where such injustice is no longer tolerated. This is the essence of restorative justice. It is not about punishing someone for the sake of retribution. It is about understanding the root causes of the problem and taking concrete steps to ensure that no one else has to endure the same hurt. It is about creating a system that not only holds individuals accountable for their actions, but also provides them with an opportunity to learn and grow. This call to action is especially important for each one of us, regardless of our age or background. For those of you who are 65 years old or older, you have accumulated a wealth of wisdom through decades of experience. You have seen the world change in many ways, and you know that progress is not always a straight line. You understand that every generation faces its own challenges, and you have the power to influence change in ways that younger people may not yet fully appreciate. Your voice matters, and your experience is invaluable. By sharing your stories and supporting initiatives that aim to create a fairer and more compassionate society, you contribute to a legacy of resilience and hope. Imagine a world where every time someone is treated unfairly because of who they are, they have the courage to speak up and demand change. Picture a community where the wisdom of experience is valued, where every comment and every suggestion contributes to a collective effort to improve our society. This is not a distant dream, but a tangible goal that we can achieve if we come together. When we share our experiences and learn from one another, we build a network of support that can overcome even the most deeply rooted prejudices. It is a call to action that encourages us to leave behind our apathy and embrace the challenge of creating a better future. I invite you to reflect on your own experiences and to consider the ways in which you have overcome adversity. Think about the moments when you chose to rise above the negativity, when you transformed a painful incident into an opportunity for growth. Your story, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to inspire others. It reminds us that we are not defined by the hardships we face, but by the strength we show in overcoming them. Every challenge we endure is a chance to learn, to grow, and to contribute to a better tomorrow. Now, I want to hear from you. What experiences have shaped your understanding of injustice? How have you turned moments of hardship into opportunities for growth? I encourage you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Let us create a space where your stories and insights can help light the way for others. Your support and your voice matter in this collective effort to build a community founded on respect, compassion, and accountability. As we move forward together, let us remember that change is a journey that begins with a single step. Every act of speaking out against discrimination, every effort to hold institutions accountable, and every story shared in the name of justice adds up to a movement that cannot be ignored. In a world where bias and inequality often seem insurmountable, your courage to speak out is the spark that can ignite transformative change. I am inspired by your resilience and by the possibility of a future where our experiences lead not to bitterness, but to a commitment to make the world a better place. So, if you have a story to share, if you have words of encouragement or ideas about how we can create a more just society, please comment below. Your participation in this conversation is not only welcome but essential. Let us use our collective voices to turn the tide against injustice. Together, we can transform even the darkest moments into beacons of hope and progress. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Your voice matters, your experience is valuable, and together we can build a future defined not by the pain of the past, but by the promise of a brighter, more equitable tomorrow.